thank you all so much for being here today. Again, we in CAT really appreciate the time that you're putting into your teaching. We know it's taking extra time this semester. And so then to kind of go to even do more and learn more and continually improve is just very inspiring to us. So thanks for being with us this afternoon. I'm excited about this, this topic about alternatives to lecturing, something near and dear to my heart for sure. And I'll turn it over to Jay to get us started.
Yeah, so thank you all for being here. And we're going to start with a small poll. It's got 3 questions you can see up here. They are going to be multiple choice, so to get a little more specific, I'm going to go ahead and launch it. And you should be able to see that on your screen now. If you would go ahead and answer those 3 questions. And obviously estimate, and as we said, just kind of pick one of your current classes to simplify things.
And if anybody's having trouble with the poll, please just put anything in the chat. I should have said at the beginning, any kind of questions or comments you have, if you'll just put them in the chat, Janice will bring them to our attention. She's our voice of the chat today. And I don't know if you've used the polling feature in Zoom before like this, but we who are the host of this can actually see. So we now know 4 of 6 people have voted. We can see the results as they come in. It's kind of nice from the instructor angle. And I think that's it, Jake, because I don't think Janice and I can vote.
Is that all?
Mm-hmm.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh, now it says 5 of 6. Sorry, you were right.
I think, yeah, I don't think we made Janice a co-host. I'm going to make her co-host. There we go. Now I got 5 of 5. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And I always forget to share it, so I'll make sure I do that. So now you should be able to see the results. Looked like we had a pretty even spread, right? So about somewhere along between 25 and 75% of the time for polling, for lecturing. And do you think this is the right amount? Sometimes, right, but not always, which I think is probably a good answer, right? And then this was just more of a maybe slightly fun question, but if you could not lecture, right? So discussion, great fallback. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. Show a movie, and nobody said they'd cancel class, which is always good.
And one thing I do want to say here, I'm pleased to see that nobody's saying it's more than 75% of the time. So I think we might be doing a little preaching to the choir today. And so hopefully what you'll get from this is some new techniques.
Yeah, all right. All right, so Elizabeth, you want to talk about?
Yeah, I wanted to start with this from the American Association for Higher Ed. This has been around for some time, and if you've come to CAT workshops, you've probably seen this before, but it's just the 7 principles of good undergraduate teaching. This was commissioned, and they did a big report, and there's these 7 principles of good undergraduate teaching that I think provide a nice framework for a lot of what we do in CAT and for a lot of the techniques we're going to talk about. So I wanted just to kind of start with this so we're on the same page. But these principles are that good teaching, and this is for undergraduates specifically, encourages student-faculty contact, encourages cooperation among students, encourages active learning, provides prompt feedback, emphasizes time on task, communicates high expectations, and respects diverse talents, diverse ways of learning information. So if you'll go to the next slide, Jay. So when I look at this, the question I ask myself is, where does lecturing fit in? Right, when we are standing there lecturing, we are not really encouraging, when we're the sage on the stage, we're not really encouraging student-faculty contact. Maybe if we throw out a question here and there and it's kind of spotty, we're not encouraging cooperation. It's not active. Lecturing is a passive way of teaching information. Lecture does not provide prompt feedback about what students know because we're just sharing the information. We just give it's information delivery not letting them do anything with the material. It does not emphasize time on task. And this one I think is an interesting one. We have, as we're doing these remote classes and these mixed mode classes, faculty have just said a lot like, I don't know if students are paying attention. Like if they don't turn their cameras, how do we know where they're paying attention? And the truth is, if you're not engaging them, they're not paying attention when they're sitting in the classroom either, right? So time on task, getting them to do something. Lecturing does not necessarily communicate high expectations. We can say whatever we want to, but if we're not asking students to do anything, again, it's very passive. And again, it's just one mode of delivery, right? One mode of delivery. So while we're not going to say in this, like, throw all lecture away, because we can't do that, right? We are the content experts. This is why we're teaching these content courses. But we're going to talk about how we should decrease the amount of lecturing we do and then do other techniques that allow lecture to meet, that allow our classes to meet these principles, because lecturing doesn't do it.
I got to unmute myself. So just to talk a little bit about the idea of lecturing as well. This was interesting because in my XCore class, XCore 1000 class this morning, we were talking about the liberal arts, and I'm actually going to come back and kind of show you some of the stuff we did in that class in a little bit. So I had the students, for one part, kind of looking up where this idea of the liberal arts comes from, right? And then again, some of them were surprised when they kind of went out there and found out that it's been around, for thousands of years. That was kind of a part of ancient Greek culture, right, as well. And the lecture goes back really that far also. I thought, this was kind of interesting, though, just this idea that it and again, we're still working on this medieval model of education, really, here in the 21st century. And it was very common, obviously, in those Christian and Muslim universities to lecture, in particular, because books, the students couldn't have books, right? The teachers had the books, right? And so the teachers had to read to the students, right? And so that's really where this idea of lecturing, as we know it today, comes from, even with the Latin. I'm not going to try to pronounce it because I don't know my Latin pronunciations, but it literally means to read aloud, right? And this is a engraving by Hogarth, I think, with the scholars in the lecture. But one thing I was thinking about lecturing is when I first started teaching, right? Back when I was a teaching assistant, right? I started teaching with freshmen writing classes, and so there's not a lot of room for lecturing there, right? Which is good, right? So I couldn't even kind of fit it in there, but they started asking me to teach like world literature, right? And as soon as I couldn't figure out what else to do, right, I would kick into, or anytime the students weren't responding, or anytime anything wasn't working in class, I would just automatically kick into, well, let me just explain it to you, right? And I would just stand up there and talk on and on and on about what we'd read, right? Because it was easy, right? I could do it. Like Elizabeth said, we're the content experts, so we know a lot of this stuff, and it's pretty easy to do. So one reason why I've always kind of moved myself away from lecturing is because I found it to be a little too, I guess almost too safe for me, right? It's a little too easy for me to fall back on, right? And so I try to build my classes so that I can't even kind of sneak that in as well.
And Jay, before you move on from this one, I want to add, because I can hear my STEM colleagues thinking, oh, that's easy for you. You're in the humanities. You can do this. But I want to, especially for everybody, but especially I'm seeing my STEM colleagues here, I want you to think about what lecturing actually really means. And when I have conversations with STEM faculty at Xavier and we talk about lecturing, it comes down to, I have to cover this material. I have to, and that's the word, I have to cover this material. And so then I try to get faculty to think about, does cover mean say it out loud? Like, how ridiculous would that would be if you said that sentence? I have to say this material out loud. You never say that, right? But when we say I have to cover it, it automatically kind of in the STEM world kind of then leads to lecturing. And I think that if we could change that, language to, I have to teach this material. I have to teach this material in Organic 1 before they move to Organic 2. Absolutely. And then we can think about different ways of teaching it, some of which would be lecture and a lot of it would not. because we don't just absorb that kind of complex material through osmosis, through saying it out loud. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you. All right, so that's really just our kind of rough background about kind of what we were thinking with this workshop and kind of laying some foundations for it, right? And what we really want to do is present to you all just some different alternatives that offer a variety of options, right? And come with kind of a variety of prep times, I think, as well. And we'll talk a little bit about that. The ones that are a little easier to kind of throw into class, the ones that require a whole lot of prep time as well. But we want to kind of give you the opportunity to kind of say, okay, maybe I feel like instead of doing 60% of my class time at that lecture, maybe I want to pull that back just to 50%, right? And so what am I going to fill that, I shouldn't say fill that time, but what am I going to do then with that time that I recover by pulling back on that lecture a little bit? And so these will be some of the alternatives. And so we're going to present them to you a little bit, talk a little bit about how they work, and talk about some of the strengths of using them.
Thank you. And yeah, so as we start going through these, I don't want anybody to get freaked out that, oh my gosh, I would have to totally revise my class, because we're going to come back at the end and say, with the exception of all but one that we're going to present to you, we're going to come back and say, you should start small. Do it with a chapter, do it with a unit, see how it works with your teaching style, see how it works with your student population, and then you can start to build it out. But my guess is if you try any of these, you're going to really like them, and then want to do more of it. And again, not all of these are going to be for everybody. So that's why we want to just introduce you to them. And then if one resonates with you, we've got resources available so you can learn more. And then you can also consult with us about any of these. But I don't want anybody to think we're going to leave this workshop being able to do any one of these, because we're just introducing them to you right now. And the first you've probably heard, or you may or may not have heard of this, is just-in-time teaching. And this actually came around in the late 90s, and it started with a physics professor. And it was originally created to teach physics. And since the 90s, it's really taken off in a lot of disciplines, but this one tends to be pretty STEM heavy. A lot of the Journal of Chemical Education, for instance, has a lot of research on the usefulness of just-in-time teaching in chemistry classes. But this is what this looks like. You provide what they call warm-up questions. You can call them whatever you want, but they provide these warm-up questions 2 or 3 days prior to class. Okay, so that the students you can think of these as reading guides, prep questions, but whatever they need to have done to prepare for class. And then you ask students to submit them shortly before class. And this is the key thing. The ideal is you have them submit it 2 or 3 hours before class so that you protect those hours for your class prep, because you don't know what you're going to teach until you see what the students need to know. Right. It can be up to 24 hours, but again, to maintain the just-in-timeness of it, it needs to be, shortly before class. And then what you do is you base your lectures or your discussions or your teaching methods on what students need to know. One thing that think about this. You go in with your basic, public health lecture, right? You've got this basic lecture on nutrition and public health. It could be that students already know 60% of that because they read it, they got it from the book, or they know it from previous, classes. And yet that's what you're spending your precious class time with them, is on this material. The beauty about just-in-time teaching is you put your energy into writing these really good warm-up questions that then direct you to what you should be teaching. You can see where the confusion is, you can see what they don't know, and then that's what you spend your time in class working on, is that information. It's in like an intro psych class or a class like this, it's a really great technique on where to focus your time. And then because you're not lecturing on this material that's unnecessary to lecture on, to say out loud, then that frees up time in your class where you can do the active learning and the more interactive, collaborative activities and discussions that you would like to do. And again, not to pick on my STEM colleagues the whole time, but again, coming back to you guys, I know I hear it all the time. I can't do this active learning because I've got too much material to cover. Okay, and again, I would like to replace that with teach and then think about what's the best way to teach it. And so the beauty about just-in-time teaching is you can know what this class needs, you can meet those needs, and then that frees up time to do more activities and allow students to actually do something active with the material. Okay.
There weren't any questions in the chat, but a few comments. Tyra commented about the book Slow Professor helped her to feel like she didn't have to cover everything. Morwell then agreed and said he used to do a lot of lecturing, but has drastically reduced it. And it was mainly due to the student comments. And Rosalind Reese made a comment that she recently read a paper on the just-in-time teaching in pharmacy education. And Tyra said she'd be interested in reading more on that.
Great.
And then there's a question from Tyra also just came in. How do you accommodate for a range of knowledge?
Yes, that's a really good point. And so for the book, so one thing, and then I'll come back to that question. Morwell, this was actually designed, I mean, this whole thing was designed for teaching physics. So if you're already moving away from lecture, I'd highly recommend you look at some of the web resources I'll provide for you to look at this. It's a really nice technique. So that's the skill of being, this is where your content expertise comes in. So you can do a couple of things here. Now we're getting into the weeds about just-in-time teaching, and I want to move us forward, but I'm going to answer this, but there's some skillful ways to do it. One is you can have students doing independent learning in your classroom during class time. They get into groups, they work on the different points of confusion, and you can put them together at different points of confusion so that they can work with each other and all get up to the same speed by the end of class. So if there's a group of students that already know, I don't know, one part of the analysis, but these other students don't, then you can have these students work together to get now where they know it too. And you're not having the students who already know it not really learn anything while you're covering this. That's one way. You can also have it where you have students, you do the groups by students who have the skills, students who don't, so then they learn from each other, and you're capitalizing on the collaborative component. And again, learning from each other, doing that kind of one-on-one tutoring in class like that is great for the students who already know it, right, to really be able to express it. So there are a number of techniques for that, because of course that's the issue, right? Thank you, Tara. Great question. And I'm happy to give, we've got resources, like I said. All right, next slide. So the just-in-time teaching, it stimulates a one-to-one tutorial experience. I just said this. Okay, so it builds this into your class, and now they're learning from each other. There's all kinds of research since this came out in '99, all kinds of research in all the disciplines about it produces a higher rate of learning than traditional lecture courses. Higher grades, higher retention 6 months later. Like they've looked at this a bunch of different ways. Higher grades in the next class. Okay, it's because they're doing something with the material, it enhances learning. And then again, I'm not gonna go through all those, but it meets the principles of good teaching, right? It gets that content going, it makes it active. By definition, you're giving them prompt feedback. By definition, they have to be on task now, because that's what, you're focusing on that. It's a really powerful technique that way, just-in-time teaching. Okay, next one. Interteaching. So interteaching came out, this is 2002 with a Boyce and Hineline article came out of this. And I've got the little screenshot of the actual article here. And interteaching has really taken off, especially in large survey courses, like an intro psych course, intro to biology, those kind of courses. We actually have 3 people in our psych department who use interteaching fully the entire semester to teach intro psych. They started slowly, and then now the whole semester is this way. But what happens here in interteaching is the instructor produces a prep guide. Again, you can call this what you want, but it's a prep guide for the chapter, the topic, the unit you're going to be covering that day. And you spend time creating really good prep guides. So instead of spending time creating that lecture, you're spending time creating really good prep guides. And this guides the students on what they need to know. What are your objectives, your learning objectives, right, for that material? And then in class, you can pair them up. Traditionally, Boyce had them in pairs. Most people who are using interteaching now are doing it in small groups of no more than 3 or 4. But you get them in groups and they discuss the prep guides. And that's 75% of the class time, right, is discussing the prep time. So the professor kind of is walking around, seeing if there's any confusion, filling in the blanks. Every now and then the professor might say, hey, everybody, the whole class, this was a good question. So be sure that you pay attention to this. Okay, but you're kind of doing this while they're doing these prep guides. And then at the end of every class, students complete and turn in an interteaching record. And this is a form where you can ask whatever questions you want at the end of each one. What's still confusing to you? What's still a muddiest point? However you want to phrase it, but you get where are the points of confusion? And then you start the next class with a little mini lecture on the points of confusion. So that's the 25% of the class that's lecture. And it's, again, directly meeting student needs because you find out what was confusing. You write a really good prep guide, again, about, I'm thinking about intro psych, sorry, because that's my perspective, but you write a really good prep guide about the functions of the brain and the divisions, different structures in the brain. And then I see everybody on their prep guide has got the hindbrain and what's going on. What they really need to know is about neural transmission, right? Then I come back in 25%, do a little mini lecture on neural transmission. Okay, and again, I'm not repeating material that they already know, and I'm also allowing it not to be passive. Okay, it's not passive. All right, the next slide.
We have a question.
Oh, okay.
Is the prep guide the only supplemental material, or are there course materials like the books? And this comes from Heather.
Oh, yes. So you'd still have the textbook. You'd still have, if you wanted to give your own slides, if you had modular kind of stuff that they need to work on, that's fine. The prep guide, and you would have to also, I should say, take up the prep guides, even if it's a check off or not, give them some points for it, right? You got to, make this, make them do it. But yes, absolutely. So the prep guides would really, you could think of it as reading guides for whatever instructional materials you're using. And it could even be the instructional materials could be videos. Watch this videos and then here's what you need to get from it. So it just kind of guides what they need to know, what you would have been teaching in lecture that now they're getting actively. That help? Great. Okay, interteaching, better grades compared to traditional methods, and it meets and again, a ton of research on this, and it meets the principles of good teaching. It makes it active as opposed to, passive. The difference, both of these, I'm gonna look you all in the eye who I can see at least, both of these, will take time to do. If you've got those lectures that you've been doing for many semesters, and now you're going to shift it to this model, okay? But your actual preparation is just different, right? It's just different, and you could go back. So once you know, okay, from the interteaching, from these interteaching reports, I know that this is the part that they were confused on. Then I'm just going to go back to this lecture I've done a zillion times and grab just that part. Yep. Yep. Okay, go, Jay. Thank you.
Sorry, muted. Anyway, a lot of you have heard us talk about, and heard me probably in particular talk about flipped teaching or inverted pedagogy over the last few years. But we thought it was a useful suggestion to include here as well. And I will point out that this is another one of these ideas that was developed originally by STEM faculty as well, right? So this was developed by a couple of high school chemistry teachers in particular, and they designed it to specifically help students who were struggling with the course concepts in their classes. Right? The basic idea of it, right, is that you find some way, right? And a lot of people jump to the idea of video, and that's a pretty common way to do it, but it doesn't have to be video. But you find some way to give the students the content you would normally give them through in-class lectures outside of class. And then you free up that class time for the more intensive and ultimately the more important work of applying those concepts, of using those concepts, of seeing if they really understand those concepts by working with them, right? As opposed to just, did you hear what I said, right? And, you know, can you answer this question? Like I said, this was developed by Aaron Sams, and some of you may remember we had him here on campus. I don't know, what was it, 6 years ago now, Elizabeth, or so, for facts, way back when, as well as Jonathan Bergman. But like I said, they were both originally high school chemistry teachers who came up with this idea, right? And again, like I said, video is the most obvious kind of way that people think about doing this, right? And I do a lot of this with my classes now, where I know, again, I need to deliver content to them. Or what I often do is kind of say, well, okay, they've done the reading in the textbook. I'm doing this with my grammar students. The textbook isn't quite getting everything I want to make sure they get in terms of content, or isn't quite taking some of the content far enough. And so then I'm supplementing that with some videos that they watch outside of class. And again, by doing that, the best thing I'm doing is I'm freeing up the class time for our work in the class, where they can apply these concepts. And I can kind of watch them and try to deal with these problems.
Before you move on, Jay, one thing that Sam said when he was here that I thought was so powerful is he said, most of the time, now again, I think we're preaching to the choir a little bit here, but most of the time we spend standing in class talking at students, and then we give them problem sets or just prompts or whatever, and then they struggle. They do the real learning, because the learning's in the struggle, right? They struggle with it when we're not there to support them. And so I really, that when he said that, that really resonated with me for the flipped model. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's really the idea you work with the flipped model. What you're flipping is ultimately the whole concept of learning, right? And you're taking this idea of Bloom's taxonomy, right? We've got this pyramid that we've all kind of learned about, right? Which down at the bottom are the foundational aspects, but also the easiest aspects of learning, right? Remembering and understanding, right? That's the kind of stuff that right now, if you're through lecture, that's what you're giving students, right? You're helping them understand, you're helping them remember the information, right? And then, like Elizabeth said, often the model we follow, right? We do that in class through lecture, and then we send them off to go home to work on these problems, right? Or write this essay, right? Or all sorts of stuff, right? And again, that's the challenging part, right? Then that's the higher order thinking and learning that we want them to do, and they're off doing it by themselves, right? So with flipped learning, you're literally turning the pyramid on its head, right? You're taking that the lower order kind of thinking and learning, right? That remembering and understanding, and you're having them do that outside of class on their own time. And again, what you're ultimately doing is freeing up the class time so that you can be there with them as they're struggling with the more complex challenges of applying the information, of analyzing information, evaluating, or even creating stuff, right? And that's the real model. Like I said, so sometimes people do it through videos, but there's plenty of other ways to do it as well, right?
There's a question in the chat from Heather. How do you help students buy into the flip model? I'm not exactly sure. Oh, buy. Okay.
Buy into.
Buy into it. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, this is something I have started to find because, again, if the flipped model has been around. They published, I think, their first book in about 2012, right? So this is probably the newest concept that we're dealing with here, right? And it was embraced in a lot of high schools, and so a lot of times you will get students who come in and they say, "Oh, we did this in high school," and I have had a good number of students say, "This was really terrible when we did this in high school, and I don't want to do it." And others will come in kind of more with the attitude of, they have these, our students are very traditional in a lot of ways, and a lot of times they'll come in and they think that the way they're supposed to learn is by being told what to think, right? And so it can be a real challenge, not for us to break through those barriers, but sometimes it's to get the students to break through those barriers and understand that that's not necessarily the best way to do it. So I pulled back a little bit, honestly, with some of this, just because I understand that they have those concerns, and so I'm trying to do it somewhat without constantly doing it. I also just stopped using the term flipped teaching, right? Just because some of them see it and no, that was terrible.
Yeah. Can I add one thing here, Jay? Because student resistance is an issue with this. Like I said, we in this workshop we're introducing, and then there's all kinds of nuances of all these. But student resistance absolutely is an issue, because it is harder to engage the material than sit there and listen to you say it to them. Now, it doesn't now then if you just say it to them, then they don't learn it, and then they don't do well on the test, and they come back and they get resistant that way, right? But you've got to. Oh, Heather, would you like to say something? Yeah, Heather wants to say something. Chime in.
So this is part of into my question, is because the online tradition, even though the way that we don't do traditional lecture styles of biochemistry, the upper level biochemistry, it's more of a active learning where we're telling information and then having them answer a question in class and discussing the answer and the application. Well, the easiest way to do this flip model was not online anywhere, where the lecture might get deleted. We got lots of feedback from spring saying, I couldn't hear, I didn't know what was going on. We couldn't listen to old lectures because we were confused about where you were at. So we've done lectures ahead of time in little films, little bite-sized films. And for a lot of the kids that are buying into it, watching the films before they come to class, we're seeing really good answers and interesting answers and everything, and interesting discussions that they're actually looking at the information. But we had a lot of students that normally come through biochem that their whole goal normally is to sit in class, let the information soak through their brains a little bit, apply the outline on homework, and they are failing miserably because they're not even watching the lectures now. So they're not getting any of the information. And I don't know how to get them to buy into it.
So for student resistance, I know, right? So the big thing is you, first of all, have to explain to them what you're doing and why. Now, I think that Jay's absolutely right about don't use the educational terminology. Don't say we're doing interteaching and we're doing this. Talk about it as your teaching style. Talk to it about is the data shows. I mean, this is like I'm looking, STEM students, right? Or even if they are in the arts, these are still students who are at Xavier. The data shows this is going to help you. And then tell them it's going to be different. It's going to be different than what you're used to. And I think the more explicit and upfront and do that repetitively until they believe you. Because what happens is they've had teachers all along who have said, you're going to have to work hard, or I'm not just going to tell you what's on the test. You're going to have to really study on your own, when that's not true, when the teacher teaches to the test, right? So you've got to have consequences. You have to buy it, and you have to live it, and you have to walk through it. The other thing is for student resistance so the big thing, that number one big thing is explicit explaining of your rationale. Don't teach behind a curtain. Explain to them what you're doing and why. The other thing is there's got to be some, and you can make the minuscule little points. Yeah, we all know students will work for 2 points out of 2,000 points. You're going to have to attach some points to it to get them to do it. There's a lot. Now, we have faculty resistance to that. Why should I give them points for doing what they should do anyway? Well, I come back and say, when's the last time you were on a committee when you knew it didn't matter? Like a committee that's just nobody's ever going to see, and then you did all this extra work, right? We all have limited time, and we have limited resources, and we're going to make priorities about how to use that time and resources. And so our students will do the same thing. And so you've got to incentivize it. This is just like we get paid, this is their job. They get paid with these points. So you've got to kind of just accept that. And then just like in a lecture class, you're never going to reach every single student. Some students aren't going to like it, but the word will get out. This is what this kind of class is, and this is what it does, and you'll get less resistance over time. And I promise you, as somebody who lived that in my own career, you'll get less resistance over time because students will know what to expect. But the only thing you can really do is be really, really explicit. And I think I saw, I'm sorry, Janice, I don't want to take your role as voice of the chat, but I saw it pop up when Jay was talking about what do you do with students who don't come prepared, and you have to call them on it. If you don't, they're going to learn. Like, they learn from our behavior. They're smart and they learn from our behaviors. And so if one time I don't watch the videos and then you come to me and you reteach it, then I'm never going to watch the videos again. So the first time they come and they haven't watched the videos, you send them to another room and say, go watch the videos, then you're allowed back in class. And Janice is laughing because we did this in a flipped workshop. Faculty showed up and we wanted to model it. Faculty showed up and had not watched the video for our flipped workshop. And we said, great. We have computers in the other room for you to go watch it and then come join this. You have to do that, because if you say, and I think of it as a term of like academic integrity too, if you say you have to do this in class, then they should have to, or before class, then they should have to do it before class. Otherwise, where's your word on that? All right, sorry, Jay, I said too much. I'm shutting up. I'm muting.
And I think for all these, again, explaining what you're doing, explaining why you're doing it, being real clear about these things is really important. Right? And I think I've made a lot of headroads. Again, I do a lot of flipped teaching. I do always have somebody on my evaluations talk about how disorganized my classes are, right? Because again, if you're not doing pure lecture, your classes seem kind of disorganized, right? Because if students are doing a lot of work, managing the time is a lot more challenging, as opposed to, well, I've got this lecture I've given 20 times. I know exactly how long it'll take, right? That seems very organized to students, but this kind of stuff seems a little messier to them, right? So you just also got to be ready to kind of talk about that in your faculty updates too.
I want to make sure that, Tyra, your question got answered as well. Jay mentioned that flipped teaching is not just video-based, other models. The pre-recorded part was her hesitation. And then I think Tyra must have remembered our faculty development. And I also put a link to a resource on our Cat Food blog on how to ways that you could motivate unprepared students in the flipped classroom.
Yeah,
Jay, I'll answer Tyra's in the chat if you want to go ahead and move forward. Okay, I'm just keep an eye on the time. Tyra, I'll answer you in the chat real quick.
All right, so this slide is probably the one that seems the most maybe obvious to you, and there's no citations because I think this is all kind of inherent in teaching, but just thinking about collaborative learning, right, without these big kind of organized things, right? This is the kind of thing where you could kind of say the day before class, you know what, I'm going to cut out this part of the lecture, 20 minutes of this lecture, and I'm going to have them discuss it instead of me lecturing on it. And I'm going to see what they figure out and what they're able to figure out together. Or I'm going to ask students to do a presentation. I've been doing a lot of this with my remote classes, right? So I put them in the breakout rooms. I give them Google Slides, right? And I say, okay, you all have 15, 20 minutes to put together a slide that teaches this concept that we read about or watched a video about or are working on, right? Or you can just have them do research. This was the thing I wanted to show you. This is what I did with my freshmen in the X-Core class today. Again, we were talking about the liberal arts. And again, I could have gone up there and I could have lectured for 20 minutes on what the liberal arts are, the history of the liberal arts, and those sort of things. But I really didn't want to do that, and I didn't figure out they wanted to do it either, right? And so I used Padlet, right? And I kind of broke them up, and I said, this group of students is going to focus on the history of the liberal arts. This group is going to do the future of the liberal arts. This group is going to do just the liberal arts today. I said, go out, do some research, find some articles, find some videos, and then post them here, right? And so this is what they came up with in about 15 minutes in terms of thinking about, they're supposed to be color coded, right? So purple's supposed to be future, green's supposed to be past, and I think yellow is today, right? And this is some of the stuff they found, and then we kind of pulled it all together, right? And again, all I had to do was kind of stand up there and kind of ask the questions, as opposed to delivering the content to them because they found it on their own, right? Now, this is a pretty easy one, right? If you go and type in future of liberal arts in Google, you get 1,000 hits, so you want to kind of think about where they're going to look for the information, how they're going to look for the information. Right? But I think it was a much more interesting class, both for them and for me, right? Because I just kind of stood there for 15 minutes, just kind of watching the time while they were working, right? And then, like I said, I pulled it back together by asking some questions. Right? So anytime I think you can ask the students to work together in a way, whether it's through a small group discussion or a full class discussion, right? These idea of presentations are great, right? Some of you saw me kind of demo Google's Jamboard at a workshop a while back, which I find really kind of useful because it's a collaborative whiteboard that even if the students are on Zoom, they can work together on this kind of blank space to put some information, together. Right? And Janice also is very good about all the different ed tech kind of resources that we have out there, like Padlet and other things like that also. All right, and then I think I'm doing the last one here I think Elizabeth's got the last one after this one, but my last one here is going to be talking about problem-based learning. I'm going to move us along pretty quickly. This is probably the most complex model to work around lecture-based teaching, right? This one requires a pretty significant amount of planning. You could do it on a small scale, probably, for a single class or something like that. But this is the kind of thing where you would probably be better off, and I know our colleagues in pharmacy use this quite a bit, which is to have the students working through complex real-world problems. And as you can see here, the most important thing, right, is that they have to, again, do the research to figure out that problem. It's not that you've given them the answers already and they're just figuring out how to synthesize what you've told them. They're going out there and trying to figure out how they would solve this problem by looking into these things as well. So these kind of 3 points are most important when you're thinking about problem-based learning, right? The problem's got to motivate the students to seek a deeper understanding about the concepts, right? They can't just kind of say what they already know, right? It challenges them to make and defend well-reasoned decisions. So again, obviously, you're building in a lot of critical thinking skills there as well, right? And ideally, it's the kind of thing that also pulls in past knowledge, past course material as well, so that they can, again, so they can see how the whole curriculum fits together, as opposed to, hey, I can learn this for this class and then forget about it as well. So, all right, and I'm going to hand things over to Elizabeth for the final point.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, Jay, the whole memorize and dump, right? And that's one thing I think, especially in strict lecturing and then testing on the lecturing, encourages the memorize and dump, because they don't have to do anything actively with it except study it for a test. And then that encourages that, and that's the way the brain works, right? So unless they actively do something with it, they're not going to actually retain it. So I think especially those of you who are in courses where they do build and they build to the next one, that's all the more argument to do something active in class so that they actually retain it. And there's data on that I'm happy to share. The other thing I was going to say is that, especially given at Xavier, we have some students who come to us, as President Francis would say, come to us through no fault, underprepared through no fault of their own. It's all the more reason not to just lecture at them and let them actually find where that struggle point is, find where the confusion point is, and then meet them there so they can come up. I think everything we want to do really doesn't get solved by lecture alone. Okay, last one we want to present, and we decided to do this one last because it's the kind of the easiest to begin doing. If you have been lecturing a lot, no matter what you reported on the poll, if you've been lecturing a lot, this is kind of the easiest one to get started with. And again, this cartoon here, nobody wants that, right, in their classroom. It might be small for some of you, but it's a boring class and nobody's thinking about the class material. So this is not what you want. So what a great thing to do, and a great first step, although I think all of these, this is the next slide. Anyway, a great first step is to do interactive lecturing. So that is where you take your lectures you already have And then you incorporate engagement triggers, what are called engagement triggers. And you do this a few times per class. So you start doing it every 17 minutes. I don't know, I'm making this up, 15 minutes. But you want to do it really like every 7 to 12 minutes is when you want to do it for attention span reasons, where you do a little mini lecture and then they do something with it. And you do a little mini lecture and then they do something with it. This allows, and so it's any activity. I'm going to show you a bunch of activities, but it can be any activity, but it's an activity that allows them to do something directly with the material, not just passively listening to it. Whether you're on Zoom, whether you're in the classroom, whether you've got both, interactive lecturing, breaking it up so they do something. Next one, Jay. There are a bunch of what are called classroom assessment techniques, CATs. There are a bunch of CATs that you can use for interactive lecturing. We have a great book that has 50 different classroom assessment techniques in them. It tells you how, it's a very good book. It tells you how to use them, how to adapt them, how to use them in different courses. Like, it's really just a great book. We've got it in the resources. But if you're opening a lecture, then a good thing you can do is you can do a background knowledge probe. Who has heard of this? Who's, I don't know, background knowledge probe. Who's heard of this before? Who's experienced something before? But it's just something that the beauty of a background knowledge probe is it activates prior knowledge. And there's a lot of evidence that shows activating anything that the student knows about the topic, then gives them, it activates that schema, and then everything you say subsequent is easier for them to kind of hang on to. So it's a great thing to do. But we can do this now through polls, like Jay started with a poll, right? Clickers are becoming a little passe, but still use clickers, Kahoots, however you want to do it. We've got all kinds of tech now, but something to kind of open it up where students have to think about the topic. Okay, move forward. Now, again, notice for interactive lecturing, we're not talking about like the just-in-time teaching or anything where they've done the prep or they've flipped where they've done the prep. This is just interactive lecturing where you're just going to take your lectures you have and break them up. Okay, so use that to kind of start. Now you've gone for about 12 minutes, right? 12, 15 minutes, and now you want to do another one. So there's all kinds of good assessment techniques for checking in. And I'm not going to tell you what each one of these are, but the book, it's Angelo and Cross, Classroom Assessment Techniques. Angelo and Cross, Classroom Assessment Techniques. It's in our last page of resources. But you can do a think, pair, share, right? Oh, we hardly ever give students time to think in class because we have so much to cover and say out loud. You can do a tell your partner where they pair up and they have to describe things to your partner. One of my favorite, a directed paraphrasing. You get some kind of complex topic and then you put them in pairs and they have to describe it to each other as they would if you were 7 years old. You can only use 7-year-old language. Again, the book talks about all of these. But you would pepper those in with things of just like get in groups and see if you have any questions. Like just anything where you pause and you let them do something with material. And then there's really good closers for interactive lecturing. You can do the muddiest point. So at the end of your lecture, what is still confusing to you? A 1-minute paper where you say, what was the one thing you learned today? One thing you still have questions about? One thing you want to know? Or, you know, 1-sentence summaries are really cool where it's like, okay, we covered a lot today. What was the main point in 1 sentence? But these are just kind of, these are things that break up your lecturing.
You did have one question in the chat from Tyra. She asked, are these ungraded?
Yes, Tyra, great question. These are ungraded because this is the teaching method. I mean, I realize I know the flipped classroom, the videos are the teaching method too, but here's what you're doing with your class time. So yes, these are ungraded. You just build your classroom, your teaching style and your classroom norm that we're going to be doing these. And these tend to not get student resistance because by the time you do one, they've heard you talk enough. Because even if we say we're going to do one every 7 minutes, you know this from CAT workshops. We say, well, I'm going to do it 7 minutes, and then all of a sudden, wow, 15 minutes have gone by, and I had so much to say. So yes, these are ungraded. These are ungraded. Thank you. Great question. All right. I don't want to say that again. The interactive lecturing meets all these, and it's a great way to do it. So no, that's all I was gonna say. So Jay, you want to do this?
Yeah, so what we'd like you to do as we're wrapping up here is a little bit of collaboration. So in the chat, what we'd like you to do is we'd like you to think about what's one lecture that you're least looking forward to giving. So what's the one topic that you have to cover, but you really just, that's the one thing you really just don't like to even to talk about in your class. And then what's an idea that you could incorporate from today to I said replace it, but maybe just enhance it, supplement it, however you want to kind of think about it. So approach it from that way. What's the one lecture you really don't want to give next semester in one of your classes? And what might you do based on what we said today to help make it a little more palatable for you? Go ahead and put those in the chat, and we'll see what you have to say.
Let me see, what lecture are you looking at?
More. I think you unmuted yourself, and we can hear you thinking.
Oh, hey, I wanted to ask you something before I write something, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Okay, so the just in time for teaching method, just that you mentioned it at the very beginning. I kind of use a variation of that method, but there's one thing that Elizabeth said that I don't do, and which I think is very important. Like I give my students they have to read the chapter before we talk about it in class, and I give them a quiz, a multiple choice quiz to do, to make sure after it's a pre-reading quiz that they do, but I don't get the feedback before the class. So I was wondering, like, what kind of feedback? I need feedback before the class so that I can use the feedback to change my teaching. What kind of feedback? I mean, what kind of, like, something that I can use to change the discussion of the next lecture. That's my question there. Because what I do, I don't get the feedback, but I just go and start discussing because they would have read the chapter already, but I don't get the.
Yeah. So what you're really doing is you're using the quizzes as a reading check, as opposed to a just-in-time teaching tool. You're using as a reading check to be sure they did the reading, to motivate them to do the reading so that they're there and right, they can do this. So what you can do is you could do the exact same thing, but give them the quizzes 24 hours in advance. Give them the quizzes 24 hours in advance. Then look at what they missed on the quizzes and use that to guide your lecture part.
Yeah,
that would be the just-in-time teaching component.
Yeah, that's the part I need to fix, I think.
So more what I've been doing in my grammar class, because I had that kind of problem. You know, they do exercises, but I'd get the exercises before class on Tuesday, and I wouldn't even be able to look at the exercises until, you know, after class on Tuesday. So I've been using Brightspace quizzes to actually give them their homework exercises. It's been a little bit of a challenge because I'm really kind of running into some of the limitations of, you know, kind of multiple choice. If it's self-checked, it's got to be kind of multiple choice kind of stuff. So I'm going to look at something more complex like Top Hat for next time I teach this. But by taking those and making it that way, they get the instant feedback. It gets graded automatically, and then both they and I can see where they were having trouble. And so when class starts on Tuesday, I can pull up the statistics for the quiz, and I can hone in. And I can say, okay, only 20% of the students got question 7 right.
Okay.
So let's hone in and let's focus on that problem, not just that problem, but that concept. Right.
Okay.
And so that's kind of way I've been kind of incorporating this just-in-time teaching with my grammar class, right? So that I can, again, skip this if everybody's getting certain stuff right, or most everybody's getting certain stuff right. Again, I don't want to go over it again in class, right? But I can focus in on what they're struggling with. So it takes more setup for me because I got to turn them into quizzes, and like I said, I'm running into the limitations of doing some of that stuff as multiple choice.
I think it's worth it as long as you. Yeah, I think that's something I can do. Okay, so let me see if I can do this.
So as we're wrapping up here, looks like looks like some of you know exactly what you don't want to lecture about. Rosin doesn't want to lecture about over-the-counter medications for ear, eye, and oral disorders. She might use the interactive teaching method. That'd be great.
Rosalind, I replied to you via the chat, but I also just want to say, yeah, these are things that can be done in large classes. And the book's got a section about how to do these things in large classes. We also have another book, and so we also have another book. It's called Active Learning in Large Classes. So check those out. We have a CAT library, Rosalind. So Rosalind's one of our new faculty as well. Welcome. We have a library in CAT, which is on the 5th floor of the library, and you can come by and you can check out the books. We will sanitize it for you and slide it under the door to you. But they've got some really good details too. And we'll also look up some web, like if there's any one of these that really resonate with anybody you want to learn more about, let us know, because we can also send you some web resources, and that's contactless. So there we go.
Tyra made a good point about using Brightspace assignments for some of this stuff, which is, and I think that's a really good one that I keep kind of forgetting about. But if you set it as a text-only submission where they have to type it into the field as opposed to uploading a document, it cuts down on the amount of time you have to spend kind of clicking things. You don't have to open up the document preview to see what they submitted. I think that's a great point.
And Heather, I see yours. And PSA, having them watch, the PSAs that are already out there from because reputable organizations, that also has the extra benefit of teaching them what's a good organization, what's reliable, what's not. And also for my health psych midterm this time, I had them create some PSAs. So that's also a nice, you could do that in class, right? That's the thing. If they had the material, now create your own PSA from there. Mm-hmm.
And Shana was talking about kind of the kind of tedium or exhaustion of having to do the same thing repeatedly, right? So again, recording it ahead of time would free up some of that class time, but then also kind of cuts down on that. And again, if you're getting tired kind of with your lecture, if you're not feeling it, obviously that's going to impact also the students. So being able to kind of pull it out of the class and save yourself that emotional drain, I think, is a great approach too. And
Jay, will you share your slides one more time? Let's get through the last two. And so to get started on this, if one of these techniques does not appeal to you, don't use it. Students can sniff out inauthenticity a mile away. And if you don't like it, that means you don't buy it, and then they're not going to buy it. So if it does not appeal to your personality, your style, don't use it. And then start small, especially if you're thinking about doing one of the really ones where it really changes class time, like flipped or just in time or INTERTEACHING. Try it for one unit. You try it for 1 year, but this last week, last weeks of classes, and see how it goes. See how it likes. Get feedback from students. See if you like it. And then I'd already said this, but explain the technique to the student. Be very, very explicit. You can't explain it enough. Shockingly, students don't go around thinking about why we teach, how we teach. They don't go around thinking about teaching at all. They go around thinking about how I'm going to do well in exams. So be as explicit as you can. Say it multiple times, again, to get that buy-in. And then enjoy it. Like once you do something like this, oh my gosh, it's so much better than saying the same thing over and over and over. Now you're always going to have your favorite little examples and your favorite little stories, and you're going to say those over and over until you retire. And good on us for doing that, right? But as far as lecturing on the ear and oral medications, who wants to hear ourselves do that the whole time? So enjoy it. And then the last slide here, Jay, if you'll do the last slide, is just the resources. We've got some resources for each one. We're happy to share these, but again, if one of these resonates with you, we're happy to give you even more. Like we can get deep and give you a little resource on each one.
I think we have all these books in our CAT library.
We have all these books in the CAT library. Some of these are websites, but we have books on them in our CAT library for sure. So you can take a picture of this or screenshot. That's what students have trained me to do. You don't have to take a picture anymore. You can do a screenshot, and that way you've got it. And that's it. That's what we have for you today. Thank you all. And we're happy to take some questions, but thank you so much, Jay, for pulling this all together. Thanks, Janice, for serving as the chat. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I hope that I hope you got something out of one of these 6 that we presented that might be useful to you to stop just saying things out loud. Any last questions or comments? We're right. Ooh, we're at 5:01. Just let you know we're 5:01. So if you need 5:01. So if you need to go ahead. And it's wonderful seeing you.
The recording. Is there any way we can access the recording as well?
Yep.
Yep. We will have this posted in some form to our YouTube page in a few days or next week, and then those usually get listed in the weekly emails I send out. So if you don't see it this Friday, the link will be out next Friday. But you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is Zula CAT, I believe.
No, it's Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Faculty Development. So if you go to YouTube and just type in, search for Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Faculty Development, is there. But also, if you notice, along the side, hey Jay, would you unshare so I can just see everybody now?
Yep.
Do you mind? Thank you. Along the side of Jay's emails, when he sends his weekly emails, we tend to just focus just on the events, but there's good information on the sides, and one of them will be each time we publish something new, it'll be there. So then you will have access to this as well.
Yep.
And Sakina, you can do it. You can do it.
Okay.
4 weeks to go. Yeah.
You can do it. Thanks, you guys, so much. I appreciate you being here.
Okay, thank you.
Hi,
Bye.
Tyra. Thanks for showing your face at the end. All right, y'all. Be well.
Okay.
Let us know if you need anything from us.
I
Bye.
will.